We are live. I think we're live. I'm just waiting for that blue. Yes, we're live. We have the live orange oblong. We're live. This is part 2 of Victor Glencoe's questions for Jeff. And it's not really a question, but you know, please go along with it. Please tell us about your interests and hobbies.
All right. Well, obviously, I touched on a lot of that in the first one, but I think when I read the stuff about calling SFPs entertainers, that really resonated with me because it's always what I've most enjoyed doing, was entertaining in some way, and I think from an early age I looked at different ways of doing that, but like I said, radio was always a big, was something that I really enjoyed listening to and then imitating. I would pretend that I was doing my own radio show. I don't remember the first time I did that, but at a pretty early age, and I would make up my own songs. Way before I heard of Weird Al, I did my own kind of parody songs and weren't always necessarily for comedy. Sometimes they were just like, I would use a tune that I had heard, either on the radio or at church or just, in some place I knew the tune from, and I would sort of just lift that tune and write my own words to it. And when I say write, I don't necessarily mean actually write down, but I mean sing, come up with my own words. One of the places I enjoyed doing that was in the car, which my father did not enjoy. But he would occasionally let me do it if we were on a long trip for a certain period of time, and then that's enough. But for the most part, this was a very different childhood for my son growing up, because I always have something going in the car, usually music, and my father didn't like there to be stuff in the car. Later on, like when I was, I don't know, 17, 18, and he had bought a car that actually, I think the first one that had a CD player, which I didn't have in my car until the one that I got in 2006. That's the first time I had a car with a CD player, but he had one back in the mid 90s. And he would play classical CDs. So occasionally he would have, some classical music going in the car, and that was acceptable, but he never wanted to have like, just regular radio station, things like that on in the car, because that was all like terrible stuff to him. He did not want to have on stuff with electric guitar solos and stuff like that. That was noise. That wasn't music in my dad's world. So yeah, very different for me with my son growing up with me constantly listening to stuff in the car, from including rock and rap and all kinds of stuff.
So
my dad hated rap even more than rock.
Right. So your son as a whole heard a whole host of 1980s music.
Oh yeah, yeah. He and Foreigner's one of his favorite bands. So he and he loves Michael Jackson too. So yeah, he had plenty of exposure to good 80s and 90s stuff. So yeah, music and radio were always big things for me, and on the other performing aspects, like when I got into performing on stage and stuff like that. I never got good at any musical instruments. I tried a few when I was younger. I tried to start learning piano and things like that, but I never really did that to any extent. Like a lot of things, I would kind of tinker with stuff, but not really get good at. I think probably if I ever actually was trying to, for an extended period, play in a band or something like that, I would probably have to do like drums or percussion, because that's contrary to the stereotype about white people. I actually have a very good sense of rhythm. I've always have, so that's been the thing that I, pick up the most in songs. Actually, is the rhythm of songs, and so sometimes when I was making up songs, I would play on something like a tambourine or bongo drums or things like that. Because I could always pick up the rhythm and do it like that, play that. So I even do it in in my mouth, when I have like with my teeth, and the things I can't do it in a way you can hear over the microphone. But when you've got like a beat that you do with your teeth, where you slide your teeth on each other and you kind of have a sound, and I do that because you can do it in some ways where it sounds like the record scratching, like on a rap thing or a dance where there's a lot of like record scratching. You can do that sound, but also use it as like a drum kind of a percussion type sound. So I did that, my whole life, and different
So beatboxing?
songs and songwriters. Never did a whole lot of that. I mean, every once in a while, I guess. But, yeah, and I've got recordings of of a few things. Like there's one tape that we did like around Christmas in my freshman year of high school, where my stepbrother got a keyboard for Christmas, and so and he and my stepsister, one of them got like one of those like Fisher Price My First Tape recorders or something like that. So we recorded this tape where we did like first we played on the keyboard and made up like what you call like freestyle raps, or just like made up stuff, to the music, and then later on we were doing like pretend radio shows like the All Request Hit Line or the All Hit Request Line or whatever and stuff like that. And the funny thing was the keyboard had this one song that was built into it. It was a demo song where you hit the button and it would play this one that went like dun 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 dun. So it was like when we were doing the thing, like people would request a song, but he would keep playing that. That was like the running gag, is that every song requested was that same song because that's the only one that was programmed into the keyboard. But then he knew how to play a few things. Like somebody requested "Mary Had a Little Lamb," so he played that, on the keyboard. He knew how to do that. So, there was a little bit of variation, but that was fun. So there's a few things that exist like that. My brother and I would do some things where we messed with other recording. Like I had recorded stuff off the radio, and we edited some things over some of that, and then we did our own kind of little radio show. We recorded things. We also had a show that I called the Miller Show, which was the two of us doing like we were doing a radio show where we played music, because I had lots of cassette tapes, and we would use the stereo in the living room and do our little banter or whatever, and then I'd hit the cassette tape and play a song. So it was like we were doing a show, and we actually recorded a couple things for that too, because when we went to Disney World when I was in high school, he had a micro cassette recorder that he took with us, so we actually recorded some stuff at Disney World and pretended like we were doing the radio show. When we were all done, we were back at the hotel on the last day. We did like a review.
This is just so the kids out there.
Oh yeah,
know what a cassette tape is.
Yeah,
that's it is. That's what it is, kids.
Wow, what's that? I've never seen one before. Yeah, I was talking to work recently about like all the travails of cassette tapes and how when one would come unspooled while it was playing or recording in the player, and you had all this tape everywhere that you had to, wind back onto the cassette and all that kind of great stuff. And if it broke, it was just, it's gone, hard to repair. But
so kids,
but
it
yeah,
would come in little containers like this, and it would open out. Then you stick it in, mind your fingers, and close it up and play it.
But yeah, we recorded on the micro cassette recorder. We did like reviews of all the rides and shows and stuff we had done at Disney. So, and the last time I asked my brother if that recording still existed somewhere, he wasn't sure, but he thought he might have it somewhere packed away. So, if I ever get a chance to get a hold of that again and try to record it in the computer so I can actually have that, still playable, I don't know. That would be awesome. I have a few things like that I'd like to preserve if I can. But anyway, a lot of my hobbies and interests have been in that area, and of course, like I said, did community theater, did high school plays, did stuff like that. I enjoy just like, and those have to do with like something that could be a job or whatever, but like in my daily life, I try to take those opportunities just sort of naturally to perform and entertain people with things that just occur to me. Like I talked about before, as a parent, when my son was little, making up bedtime stories and just improvising with things from around the room that I would see, using his stuffed animals and other stuff that was in his room to come up with ideas for the story. And improvisation is like my number one thing. So doing, like, at work, I do impressions of people sometimes. Like there's other, like, where, I'm in the office, but of course, like I said, there's restaurant managers that come in throughout the day. And so everyone knows, the people I work with know what they sound like and stuff. So when I do impressions of those, I can crack up my office coworkers by doing that.
Do you want to do some now?
Well, no, because nobody watching this is going to know who any of these people are. So it won't.
Yeah, but if it's a great performance, they're going to love it anyway. And I've heard some of the character will come through.
Well, I don't like being told to do that. Put it that way. Like,
okay, don't do it. I refuse to hear you do it.
It has to be natural, man. Like, I'm out in the course of things, and you've heard me do that before. When I do impressions of people, it's not something where I'm just going to on cue be able to do it as much. Now, if I had to do that for a job, obviously I would. There would be times in which I probably would have to do that. If I had a show and that was like, okay, now's the time to do this, well, you got to go ahead and do it. So, but like I've said before, I always feel like when stuff is like scheduled, that it's not as fun. It's more fun if it's just spontaneously get the opportunity, which is why I loved when I was in drama class in high school. They had this game they did called Chairs, where you had two chairs set up and you just had two people sat in the chair, and they just usually were given like an opening scene that or setting they were supposed to be in, and then they would just act, just improv whatever, and then somebody yells out freeze, and then people have to freeze in whatever position they're in, and the person goes into one of those positions and then basically changes the scene in some way based on the positions they're in, and changes it into something else. And that was always my favorite game, because there's just so much opportunity to just make that fun. Just use whatever to. I mean, I would do that like for a living, like for real. If there was like a, and there have been things that do that. There's like improv troops and stuff like that. And so something like that, if I had the opportunity to do, would be great. If I could just do a situation like that where I could keep on coming up with scenes and interacting with the audience in some way, just things like that would be really good. And also voice acting stuff, if I had. So hopefully, this will be one of those. I talked about, I hadn't had my big break yet, so hopefully somebody watching this is a talent agent that will see my fantastic ability to improv in my voices and say, this guy needs to have a contract or whatever.
Do you want to talk
That
about
hasn't happened yet, but maybe this will be the time.
Do you want to talk about your project,
your
audio project?
Well, I mean, I think what you're talking about is I've had this idea for a while of sort of making a old-time radio show kind of thing where, like a radio drama, because there are still some people making those things. There's things like Imagination Theater and stuff like that, but I would make my own and, I don't know, put it on YouTube or something else and just do like a old-time radio show, and with all the sound effects and the kind of over-the-top organ music and all that kind of great stuff they had like back in the 40s. So that's an idea I've had for a long time that I've never really done a whole lot with. But I did write some dialogue for a first episode, but I sort of came up with the concept. But beyond that, I haven't done much of it.
Although you have got lined up somebody else with a good voice.
Well, I've had several people that have told me that they're willing to be a part of it, but it hasn't really progressed beyond that yet.
Okay, we won't mention his name, but we've hooked up recently with someone who will be interviewed in future.
Speak for yourself, man. I don't talk about my hookups on.
Okay. So just so the folks are thinking, they're probably thinking, oh yeah, he's really interested in music. Okay, Jeff. Well, what kind of music does Jeff like?
Oh gosh, I mean all kinds of stuff.
Well, specifics.
Well, it's hard for me to be specific. I mean, I can just start. What do you want me to start listing artists and songs that I like?
Yeah, exactly. Your favorites.
Jars of Clay, Phil Collins, Susan Ashton, Genesis. I mean, I could go on and on with stuff like that. You know, I start to draw a blank. Switchfoot, um, Fleetwood Mac, Sixpence None the Richer, John Mellencamp, and Debbie Gibson.
Jeff once sent me a video. I think it was The Power of Love music video from Back to the Future.
Huey Lewis and the News. That's another good band. Man, there's all kinds of stuff. I think if I have to like say overall like my most listened to kind of area of music, growing up at least, was probably what they usually call adult contemporary or like soft rock type of stuff. But it doesn't mean that's all I listened to. It just sort of happened. It sort of happened that way. A lot of things sort of happened by sort of circumstance. And it's like with radio, like the radio stations that I was able to listen to because they were in my broadcast area, and B, was able to listen to because my parents allowed me to, because there was stuff that they basically were like outlaw. Like I wasn't allowed to watch MTV when I was still living with my father. That changed once I moved in when my parents got divorced. When I just moved in with my mom, then I was able to watch MTV there, and so I sort of expanded my music at that time because I listened to like like metal bands for the first time, because I hadn't been able to. I didn't really been exposed to that. Going in the '80s and stuff, like when that stuff came out, like they played on MTV, but it wasn't played on most radio stations. So I hadn't heard of like Metallica and bands like that. Like I maybe heard of them, but I hadn't really heard their music until like I was around junior high age. So I was exposed to that, and then later on, like I started listening to contemporary Christian music, and like when I first heard that stuff, I kind of thought it was weird. But then later on, I actually heard some of the, what ended up linking the two. Where was that I always liked countdown shows. Casey Kasem and Shadow Stevens and those guys, and the radio countdown shows. So when I found out there was actually countdown shows for Christian music too, that's what eventually got me into it, because I was so obsessed with countdowns that I had to listen to all of them. I listened to country, I listened to R&B, I listened to rock, or whatever countdowns. I listened to pretty much all of them. So that started sort of my foray into that area of music, and so and I had periods where I listened to country stuff a lot, and then again it was like because that was the countdown show, so I listened to the countdown, but I didn't listen to it a whole lot else when it wasn't part of that. So there's like everything else, there's sort of phases I went through with certain kinds of music where my focus for a certain period of time. Like when I did the shows I talked about on the college radio station, the first year it was kind of a variety of all kinds of stuff. I didn't really stick to a certain genre of music, but the second year that I did it, I made it like a dance music show, called it the Rhythm Zone. So even though I gave a little leeway on that, it was still, most of it was geared towards techno, freestyle, sort of the precursors to what became known as dubstep music, the kind of electronic music and stuff like that, but also some rap if it was like danceable rap, as opposed to like the hardcore rap type of stuff, hip hop type of stuff like that. So yeah, again, I've had the Indian friend I mentioned in the previous video, like he for a period of time was really into like gangster rap stuff in the early '90s, so I listened to a lot of that because that's what he had on in the car. And then he got into Billy Joel, so we listened to a lot of him. So there was just things like that that circumstances that affected what I was listening to. But now it's so weird because basically like so much stuff just on demand that you can choose. I actually have times where I sit there and don't know what to listen to because there's just so much that I could choose from.
Yeah.
And it's hard for me to make up my mind on what I want to hear. But sometimes somebody will streamline that for me, because there'll be like a topic on a Facebook group that'll say like, oh, what's your favorite, post your favorite like cheesy love songs. And then I can go for hours and hours on that because I've got so many that I love. So, I thought recently about doing a countdown for when I hit age 40, doing like a top songs of my first 40 years countdown or something. But I realized it would be really difficult for me to come up with the chart because it's so hard to narrow down my favorite songs. So later on, I thought, well, maybe I'll do one for artists because I think that would be a little bit easier for me to do, and I could play multiple songs from the same artist. So that's why, you know, I didn't, when I was listing artists earlier, I actually stopped myself because I was like, you know what, I don't want to spoil that if I end up doing it, you know, because I just gave away like some of my top 10. So you know, supposed to wait for that, be in suspense.
You have some interesting anecdotes about how you were on the internet before the World Wide Web, and the involvement between that and your father and your brother. And could you tell us about that, about how you got onto the internet?
You know, my father and brother were sort of along the same lines as, you know, Dave Kersey, when we talked to him about how he, you know, did this like computer stuff before it became a mainstream thing. And so because I grew up in a family where I had the father and the brother I have, I got exposed to some of that stuff myself. I mean, my dad actually had some computers when we were really little that were like, he got like sort of advanced versions of the computer before it was even sold, you know, nationwide or whatever. So he got Atari computers for a while that were kind of like prototype versions of stuff. So those were some of our earliest exposure to video games, was like the Atari 800 games and things like that. Yeah, my dad had like a CompuServe account, so we had CompuServe, and there were like local bulletin board systems that we could log into. You know, your modem dials the number, and then you're on there. So it was sort of like that was sort of like the early versions of what became the internet. There was multi-user games. You know, you could log in and play role-playing games with people and do things where you were like creating rooms that people could go into and stuff like that. And then there was IRC, of course, was like the worldwide chat network. You know, that was like the first really big thing where people would go into chat rooms of whatever particular interest somebody had, and talk to people from all over the world.
Which year was this around, so that people can have an idea?
Well, by the time I was doing IRC stuff, that was probably like 92, 93, somewhere in there. When my brother took me, we went to the computer labs at Texas A&M and did that sort of stuff. And it was around that same time, I guess probably in 93, where he first showed me the web stuff. And you know, in those days, like with the web browsers, people don't understand it now because it's different in the way that they have it on their computers or phones or whatever. But it really was like you had a book on the computer, like you were turning pages, you know, right and left. So that's why the interface looked like, is that, you know, you were going back and forth on this like computer book, and stuff like Mosaic web browsers, and then Netscape was big too when that came out.
Yeah, it was because it was like so much better.
Yeah.
Than the competition.
And then of course it got bought by AOL and screwed up, because, you know, that's what always happens. The big companies buy it and screw it up, just like Google and YouTube.
And eventually, if people want to know what happened to Netscape, well, it became Firefox eventually.
Yeah, because Mozilla was the offshoot of that. So,
did you once? I might be getting mixed up with other people, but was there ever a lightning strike that affected one of your internet hookups as a kid?
First of all, Ben, you should never get me mixed up with other people. That's terrible. Don't ever do it again. But secondly, yes, one of my brother's computer, he had an Atari 520 ST, and the modem was like a state-of-the-art, maybe 4800 baud modem, something like that. But when the storm hit and whatever and shorted whatever, the modem went down to a 300 baud modem. So it was like, you know, drawing the screen one line at a time. You see, kids, back in those days, stuff didn't just appear on your screen. It had to draw it one line at a time.
So if you think Facebook's slow now...
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, like, on the stuff we used at home, most of the things that my brother had used it on, like if there was pictures on a website, it wouldn't show it because it didn't have the capacity to. So it would have brackets and the word image in capital letters. That represented a picture. So, so if you wanted to go to a site like, for instance, like Playboy.com, that was really an exciting site to have image, you.
But it might just say placeholder, hot chick, get better internet speed.
Right. So, yeah, those were the days. Yeah, so what happened after that thing is in order to even start up the computer, there was like this elaborate series of things that you had to do, and my brother figured out, just turning stuff on and off and blowing into various starts to sound dirty, but blowing into various like holes of things that were like part of the computer or the modem or just very it was this elaborate system of stuff to do.
Your childhood with your brothers could almost be a sitcom.
Oh yeah. I created those too. Like I wrote down like ideas of episodes of our sitcom about our family and stuff. And I had a period of time where I did my own like TV schedules where I had like my own TV network and had like all of the shows that I would have on my network. And of course, we were at that time we subscribed to the TV Guide magazine, so I used that as the basis for like what my descriptions and things were. It was on how to schedule a network. So you have your sitcoms usually like earlier in the night, and then your dramas later in the night. Stuff like that. I followed those kind of structures the way things were in real life. So. I haven't covered much in the last video. I talked about like certain aspects of science and things like that and social studies that I like. So I can say as far as interest that when I was a kid we went camping a lot, and I did some other kind of outdoors type stuff. And so I liked going to the zoo. I liked going to aquariums. I liked going to stuff where I got to be around animals and things. I still like those things. I don't really pursue them much my adult life, but I still had some opportunities. And when my son was younger, of course, we went to the zoos and things like that. And so I had, more exposure to stuff like that. But it's not something that I like just written off as never doing again. It's just something that hasn't been a much part of my life in recent years. But I still, I like things like, I like being able to see animals, especially like animals that you don't frequently have in zoos around here. Like, I don't know how things are in the UK, but I know here it's like, for whatever reason, they think, okay, if somebody's coming to a zoo, they want to see animals that aren't in this country. So they want to see African or Asian animals. And so you have a lot of, stuff like that. But there's a lot of North American animals that we don't have in Texas, but they don't ever seem to have them in zoos. At least not, it's very rare. So I would want to see more of that, I heard that actually the Washington, D.C. Zoo has that, but when we went there, that section of the park was closed. So we couldn't see that. So anyway.
Right. So here's something the audience might like. If you tell people how you got into typology and your thoughts on the various systems as you've learned through it, and I think you said you started with your mother gave you a test, and then so it was sort of like your initial objection to this system that thought it could tell you stuff about yourself when they didn't know anything about you, and all that kind of stuff.
I've told that story many times, but the gist of it is that the concept of like psychology and everything in that area, I have always been instinctually opposed to. And what I mean by that is the idea that somebody could like study people and say, okay, I know all about what's inside people's brains and how they think and what they feel and all those kind of great things. I always had an instinctual objection to that, to be like, when you do that, you're trying to put people in boxes and categorize them in ways that are unfair and limiting and restricting and all that kind of great stuff. So in general, that's the kind of thing that I've always been opposed to. My stance on that has changed, you could say, mellowed somewhat over the years, and with what I've learned, especially about temperaments and the Myers-Briggs types. I have seen things that have told me, okay, there are some legitimate ways to categorize people based on these traits, but I still that core belief is still there. I have not changed my basic idea that my instinct is whenever I see someone in type groups or anything else talk about like you can't be this or you can't do that. My instinct is always why not? Sure you can. Do it. Be what you want to be. So that I have not changed my aversion to that sort of talk. Um, but as far as my first exposure to typology stuff, that came from my mother because she got a book called Please Understand Me. Now I didn't know at the time that she had actually taken the Myers-Briggs type indicator, I think maybe at her job at some point in the past. So she already actually knew what her Myers-Briggs type was. We never talked about it; just didn't come up. I guess she didn't have a particular reason to tell me about that. But then when she got this book,
How old were you at the time?
19 or 20.
Right.
So she got the book and read it and was like, "Wow, this is this." The major thing that she struck her from it was the way it described like her relationship with her mother. Her mother was an ESTJ, and so it was like learning about herself and her mother's type. It kind of crystallized that she understood where some of their conflicts and things come from. My mother's an INFJ, by the way. So the INFJ ESTJ relationship, I'm sure there's plenty of websites that have gone into different relationships between different types, but
conflictors.
But I know that my mom felt very pressured and wanting to please her mother, and she never really seemed like she could because as an ESTJ mother, she believed here is the right way to do everything, and she could never be that because she can't become an ESTJ. So that was, always a source of conflict there. But
the most in socionics, they're conflictors. So like the types that get on least well with each other.
Well, I would say in life they're also conflictors. But anyway, So she found the book, she read it, she learned about that, but then she was like, okay, I have 3 sons. And it's got this test in the book, so I want to see what they. And so, of course, she had her mind made up what she probably thought our types were before she gave us the test. But then she did it, and of course, the thing is, before she gave the test, she said, "Okay." She made the mistake of telling us that she was going to do it, and also saying, "Don't read the book ahead of time because I wanted you to be like unbiased when you do this." And then she left the house. So it was all just like set up for me, like like the pie cooling on the windowsill. She's like, I'm going to give you this test out of the book. I think I know what type you are, but don't read this ahead of time. And now I'm going to go out and leave you with a perfect opportunity to go in my room, take my book, and look on this. So I didn't have much time, so I couldn't like read the whole book beforehand, but I could still like basically look at the types and figure, okay, here's what I think she probably thinks I am.
Do you think she did that on purpose so that you would look at the book?
I don't think so. That's really not her style. I can't say for sure 100%, but I don't think so. I think she really did just genuinely say that because it occurred to her that she didn't want us to do that. And even after all these years, I mean, now it's been like 20 years since then, and she still has times where she doesn't get me in terms of what my or my brothers in terms of what our instincts are. So I don't think that she was doing that on purpose. I think she just honestly it didn't occur to her that that's what I would do. But anyway, when it came time to take the test, I said, okay, I'm going to answer in some way that makes it not end up how she thinks I'm supposed to. Now, the ironic thing about that was that by doing that, I actually ended up closer to what she thought I was than I would have been if I just answered it honestly. So it was like I defeated myself without realizing it. Because on that initial test that I took, and please understand me too, the original version of the Kersey temperament sorter, I came up as INXP. And as it turns out, only the P is correct when it comes to my Myers-Briggs test.
So it was. So the test you took would have been. So it was before 1998.
Yeah.
So because it was the first book, Please Understand Me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would
And
have
so
been
you
like 95, 96 or so.
right. When did you? So when did you then go back? How did you then get back into typology?
Okay, well, initially when you read the stuff in the book, whatever, I used it for a short time, like when I came up with characters, and I said, oh, well, like, this is kind of a way I can give them sort of a thing with the character. I can give them a type or whatever for this. So I did a little bit of that, but then I basically forgot about it for a while. Sometime in the 2000s, I don't know, 2002 or three or so, and I was obviously by then I had a home computer and I was getting online and doing various things. Came across some site, and might have been in Human Metrics. I honestly don't remember, but some site that had an online test, and I was like, oh yeah, I sort of remember doing like things like this. And then there were various little, OK Cupid had them, and just like the little personality quizzes and stuff. Some of which had nothing to do with Myers-Briggs, but some of them were like, they give you results like you're the knight or you're the whatever, the jester, things like that. So when I had a girlfriend, of course, she was like, "Oh, you got to take this test that says what your love style is," or stuff like that. So like, okay, sure, whatever. And in the course of all that kind of mess, at some point, I took, was basically the Myers-Briggs knockoff test that one website had, and at that time I got ISFP, and so I took it to work, and my coworker was like, "Hey, take this test so I can see what you guys." And of course, I all wrong and biased because I had them like take it at the same time, so like they're answering their questions all like influence each other and stuff. How you're totally not supposed to do it, so so you don't get the honest answers from people. So anyway, so for several years there, I it was just sort of a thing in the back of my head. Like every once in a while, it would come up. I noticed when I looked at certain old chat logs that I had occasionally something would occur to me while I was chatting with somebody where I'd remember it and be like, oh yeah, ISFP, and every once in a while I'd be on a forum that was completely unrelated to that, but somebody would start a topic, what's your Myers-Briggs type or something, and then I would go, oh yeah, and then they'd usually post a test, and sometimes I would take it, and sometimes I wouldn't. But I always usually came up with the same result. It was always it was almost always either ISFP or ESFP on most of those tests. So the only exception was there was this one called Watchword, where it was just like you said you wrote down like the first 5 words that occurred to you or something, and then you had to go from there, and then eventually it gave you a type based on that, and that one said ESTJ. So,
Oh, that wonderful test.
Yeah, I guess the words it determined that they were all like really concrete and practical or whatever. So it was, I don't know if that's something like that. It determined from that. But there was actually a more interesting part to it because it had this, in addition to telling you a Myers-Briggs type, it also was like this word is like your hidden fear, and this one is your goal in life, and things like that, which made it pretty funny on some of the things I ended up with. But anyway.
So, would you try and put? Did you try to monkey around with that test and put certain words in to see what it would say?
I really did just do what popped into my head, but sometimes it was some dirty words, so that was fun. But anyway, 2008, for whatever reason, I did one of those kind of things again, took an online test or whatever, and it popped up. And that time, it was one of the times where the timing was perfect because I always have things that I'm really into, and on those times where I don't, where I kind of in a shift period between interests, are the times that something can grab me. And whatever it is I'm interested in, I tend to seek out something, online related to it, forums or things that discuss it in some way. So I've done that with sports, I've done it with music, I've done it with, various TV shows and things that I was into. So in 2008, I decided to actually search if there was forums discussing personality types, not having any idea, that was going to become something that lingered in any way, just sort of being curious. Oh, okay. And that's when I found the site that was called MBTI Central, which later on got renamed to Typology Central, because the actual Myers-Briggs Foundation contacted them and asked them to change it. But anyway, I noticed when I joined up that despite the fact that my type, like again, I was still typing myself as ISFP at that point, but that it was more common than most of the types of people that were on that site. But because people who tend to be most interested in abstract subjects like personality types tend to be intuitives on that site, I was vastly outnumbered. And there was actually a topic about that was called something like, why don't more SPs join this forum or participate in this forum? And so I replied to that topic, and it was like all of a sudden I was a subject of interest on the forum. It's like, oh wow, there's an SP and he's talking to people and he's doing things and he's going in chat rooms and talking with us. And so I got a lot of attention, which I enjoyed. So I instantly sort of had this way to connect with people based on nothing but being myself. That was the thing, is like most of the past ways that I had to uh, connect with people, like there had to be some effort on my part in terms of, trying to reach out to people in some way that connected with people on a particular interest, indicated, oh yes, I also have this interest, or I want to talk to you about whatever. There was always like something involved where I had to make some sort of effort. And in this case, it was like, oh, all I have to do is be myself, and people are interested in this and talking to me about me. And I'm like, how great is this? So, that was like became for a period of time my number one interest for a while there. Is I was really into, I bought Please Understand Me Too, and I read that, and it was, a really good book. And like I've said before, like reading the chapter on artisans, I started thinking, wow, this book knows me better than my own mother does. Some of the stuff it brought up about the way artisans think was just amazing to me, because I'm like, this is the way I've always looked at things, that I never knew anybody understood or anybody put it this way. Some of the stuff was just like so spot on. The stuff about the next action is a free variable, and the stuff about we enjoy being impulsive. Impulsive is always used as like this negative word by every other temperament,
Yeah.
and it's like that's what we thrive on, is following impulses and doing the fun things that occur to us. So um, having something that talked about that as a positive thing, or at least as a natural thing, was really refreshing. So yeah, my eyes opened to a lot of that. And then of course I started to see some of the negative sides of typology, some of the people who use it to try to be elitist about it, or put certain people down because of their type, or portray things as if, oh, I'm because I'm a sensing type, somehow life has come easy for me, and they're a poor, misunderstood intuitive where they've had to work for everything their whole life, and I'm the oppressive majority or something, which is really funny to me, considering most of my life I've felt you know ignored and lonely and not part of groups and things. To have people tell me that I'm part of this oppressive majority was pretty funny to me. So yeah, so I saw some of the downside to the way people use type, and some of the fights and things that people start over, things like that. And eventually, as far as a main interest, I moved on to other things. But the thing that kept me not ever dropping typology completely is that once you've learned it, you can't help but see it. It's like in daily life, as you go about interacting with people, even watching movies or TV shows, like you see elements in people and characters, and whether fictional or non-fictional, that just jump out at you, where you're like, oh, this is an example of this temperament or this type. And it's you can't, and I'm glad that I didn't entirely drop it, because at the time when I was first learning this stuff, I said, this could actually benefit my son when it comes to school and things like that. If I'm able to talk to teachers or other people about, here's how he is naturally, because my son is also an SP type, he's an ESTP. So um, yeah, I didn't say, I guess, in all of that, that eventually when I talked to enough introverts, I realized that I'm actually an extrovert. And when I finally took the actual official paid Myers-Briggs type indicator, the 93 question thing, where go through all this stuff, it also typed me as ESFP. So, and I actually don't think the extrovert introvert questions are very good on that test. That's I think is the main weakness of the MBTI, and I think it actually sort of biases people towards introversion. So the fact that I still came out an extrovert on that, it made me pretty solid that I'm an extrovert. So ESFP is the type that I eventually decided on, and now it just makes complete sense. I think in some people told me on Typology Central they thought I was an extrovert for a long time, and I didn't believe them, because again I confused like social awkwardness or anxiety or shyness and things like that with introversion, but it's really not the same thing. And so it's sort of, in some ways, I guess I could say that if I want to get all psychological on you, that I was in some ways afraid to be fully myself, that the combination of the upbringing I'd had, feeling repressed by my father and by other people to kind of not be myself, and my experiences and circumstances in life and stuff, it felt like it was safer for some reason. It was somehow easier to call myself an introvert, to be, I'm ISFP, because then he even had something in the book about being the most misunderstood type, so I could kind of relate to that and be like, oh yeah, I'm so misunderstood, and so there was a thing I could cling to there. But then it was actually there was actually a member on that forum on Typology Central called Halo 74. Pretty sure I got the number right, but anyway, he actually said something about, be your true self, the mighty pachyderm or something like that. It related to some story about elephants. I don't know. It was something about training an elephant by like chaining them to something, but then when you take the chain off, like they still act like they're chained or something. I don't know. It was something about elephant training. So that's where that came from. And that was part of what inspired me to sort of be like, what, he's right. I need to stop like sort of being this way because it's kind of a safe or easy thing for me to do, and be like, well, I can't just go out there and, fully be myself. And I kind of came to the conclusion, well, why not? I don't have to go based on what somebody else says that my type is supposed to be. All I can do is be myself. And by saying I'm ESFP, I'm only acknowledging that that's the best fit type for me from the patterns that are called these things. I'm not in any way committing myself to some particular set of behaviors or traits. But as I did that, I started to realize, well, a lot of them really did apply in terms of I've always wanted to be an entertainer and a performer in some ways. Just there have been times in my life where I just haven't been for whatever reason. But in my natural course of action, it's my instinct to try to do that as much as I can, even in jobs and things I've had that don't seem like they're really in that area. I still take opportunities to do that as much as I can, to try to entertain people at my job, at other places I've been, just sort of in my life, doing even things like YouTube videos. I started doing that when I watched the NF Geeks videos, and that inspired me to, because they had ones where they talked about SB types, and I said, well, I should do one that's, sort of based on that. And that originally came from, there was a Saturday Night Live sketch where they had a game show called Geek, Dweeb, or Spaz. And so when they did the, of course, that takes 3 of the 4 temperaments, and the only thing they left out was the nerds. So because it's NF Geeks, NT Nerds, SJ Dweebs, and SB Spazzes. So and the really funny thing about that is there was one in that show that they actually called the guy a geeky dweeb, and I have since, of course, come across geeky dweebs where those are the SJs that come off like they could be NFs because their interests are geeky. For instance, Mike's son, Noah, who's an ISTJ, but he's a brony, one of the guys that watches the My Little Pony stuff.
Really?
So some people might think...
And people already know that on YouTube. Hope you're not outing him.
No. They did a video all about it. They called it the Brony episode. Yeah. I've actually, come across real life geeky dweebs because those are, they're the guardians that their interests allow them to end up interacting with a lot of the NFs, the real geeks, because they have geeky interests. So anyway. And yes, before someone asks, there can be geeky spazzes too. Yes, if the spazzes, the SPs that are interested in geeky things can also come off that way. So, as well as nerdy, like my younger brother has referred to himself as having nerdy interests, so he would be an example of nerdy spaz. So, and I think ISTPs are probably more likely to be in that direction. Anyway,
there's a link to your next interest, politics. I recommend people watch Jeff's video. Down with the Scholarchy, because he makes the point about a right cannot impose a liability on somebody else to provide it. When you made the point about healthcare.
Yeah, I guess I didn't really talk about politics as an interest that much, but I won't go into a whole lot of detail because I'm running out of time.
Yep.
But the I had a period where I was like recording C-SPAN and watching stuff. I've had times where I was most into soap operas. I was recording those and being really into that stuff. And if you look at my YouTube channel, the SP Spaz, I've got 7 playlists dedicated to my favorite soap opera character, Tina from One Life to Live. So obviously, those have been interests that have come and gone over the years, and still and come back to sometimes, depending on what I was into at a particular time. So, and one of those things I'm interested in is college football, which is why that we need to wrap up the video because there's a game I want to see that starts in a few minutes. So,
But okay, we can hit some points quickly.
So sports is another thing that I have been interested in most of my life in some capacity. Although I've had periods of time where I was more into it than others. So both watching and playing sports, which I'm about to get back into tennis again. So
and you could just an example of Jeff's interest in politics. Were you once a delegate for Ron Paul?
I was never officially a delegate for a particular person because, as far as any of the levels I was at, I didn't have to commit to being for a candidate. But I was a delegate to the state Republican convention in 2012, and actually in the year 2000, I could have been a delegate. I was selected as a delegate to the state Democrat convention. I didn't end up going because at the time I was broke and I had my son was still a baby, and so it was like various reasons why it didn't work out logistically for me to go. But if I had, I could have actually been at the state convention for the Democrats too. So I've participated in the local political activities from both of the major parties, and even I've also participated in a few things even related to the Libertarian Party. I actually never went to any of their conventions, but somehow I got on their mailing list and got some stuff from them. So I've participated in certain things like surveys or stuff like that. So I tried to, try out sort of, so to speak, in various ways of all of the major political parties and see what they're all about and things like that. So I've definitely not just been like stuck in one group or anything like that. I tried various things related to everything that they have here locally when it comes to that. So.
And then you were really into baseball until I think you fell out of was it the other fans that got you awkward or something happened that made you fall out of love with
like I said, I seek out sort of internet ways to share things with people because it's sort of a way to kind of share the interest. And when I was most into baseball, I was a Texas Rangers fan, and so I looked for forums that discussed the Rangers, and most of the ones I found, the fans seemed very negative, and that was not my experience with most Texas Rangers fans that I've just talked to in real life. And when I went to games in Arlington, I found most people to be very positive, but the internet presence, for whatever reason, seemed to be very negative, very harsh. Somebody makes a mistake and they get really down on the player or the manager, and I did not enjoy that that attitude, that atmosphere. And there was a particular popular blog site called Lone Star Ball that was the worst. I mean, just absolutely some just really venomous negativity on that site that made me really not want to spend much time reading that stuff, and it soured my feelings about the team and about baseball in general. But I think, I might have been about reaching the end of that interest anyway, so that sort of just exacerbated it. That negative attitude made me sort of lose interest in that. But it, it wasn't just that, because I even if it hadn't been about the Rangers, I was watching and playing. I was playing baseball on the PlayStation, every day, and I lost, some interest in doing that as well. So it's like it was just time for me to move on to something else.
Right. So cause this is the last thing because we're winding up because Jeff's got a college football game to watch. You've also been really into Doctor Who, and you were like writing reviews, things like that. Tell the people where to go and read them.
One of the TV shows that I did that I got into for a while. As a kid, I had watched it, but I never watched the whole series. I still haven't watched the whole classic series because I lost interest in it before I had finished it completely. Because what I decided to do was start writing reviews of them because I'd seen other people do that. But I started didn't start at the beginning at that point because I didn't think I could. I didn't think I could do it, like write entire reviews. I thought, well, these guys are better at that than me, and so I would just make comments occasionally, but didn't write whole reviews. But somewhere along the line, I just decided, hey, I can do this, and so it was actually in in the third Doctor episodes that I started writing, started coming up with my own reviews, and so I went back to the beginning and tried to catch up to myself, and then I got into other stuff, so I kind of got off track and didn't finish doing that. But the last place I posted them was the forum that was called Gallifrey Base, but I also on I think it's actually sbspaz.blogspot.com. I posted like the first few of my Doctor Who reviews on there. So,
and do you like this one? I think you've written a full review of this Spare Parts, the creation of the Cybermen.
Oh yeah, well, because I also did audio I tried to review them all in order.
Yeah.
And when I got to the fifth Doctor time, that was when the Big Finish audio dramas started in that. So I did some of those as well. So yeah, that was one of the ones I reviewed.
So for the audience, do you like this story, Spare Parts?
Yeah, I liked it. I think, if I remember right, I think I gave it an 8 out of 10 when I gave it a rating. So I enjoyed a lot of it. I think the main complaint I had about that one was I think they made the episodes too long. That there should have been more episodes but shorter in length, and they had, get to the cliffhanger sooner. I think they kind of dragged those out a bit. So that was probably my main complaint about that one, is that just the timing was kind of off in terms of how they selected when to end the episodes, and I can't remember how many episodes it is, but maybe 4 episodes, but they're like 35 to 45 minutes long or something. So I think it would have been better to have more episodes but shorter for each individual episode. Anyway.
Well, that's it. We might as well wind up now, because Jeff hasn't.
Those are some of my hobbies and interests over the years.
And Jeff's about to go off to another one.
Yeah.
College
football. Wearing the shirt. So
right,
Texas Tech, because we're about to play Arkansas. So
it's
going to be a tough game.
So, bye-bye, folks. Jeff is off to.
Bye.